نشست اول برنامه ما شما تحت عنوان 34 امنیتی مجموعه تراژدی ها و تهدید ها است که توسط خانم جیوتی مالهوترا بنیانگذار و ویراستار صدای جنوب آسیا از هندوستان گردانندگی میشه و اشتراک کنندگان و سخنرانای ما در این پنل آقای محسن داور نماینده مردم در پارلمان پاکستان، آقای رحمتالله نبیل رئیس میشن عمومی امنیت ملی افغانستان داریم، دکتر استر زبیری رئیس تیم تحلیلی سازمان ملل در مورد القاعده و افغانستان از کشور اسپانیا و آقای دیوید سدنی دستیار سابق وزیر دفاع امریکا و همچنان جناب محمد حسین جفریان نویسنده و کارشناس ارشد مسائل افغانستان داریم که به زودی فرصت وقت استیج کلیه شد میشه که جای خود بگیرد.
Assalamu alaikum, adab, namaskar, good morning. Welcome to the first session of the Iran Dialogue right here in Dushanbe, Pakistan. And I just want to start by saying thank you very much to Dawar, who's the head of the Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies, for gathering more than 100 people from around the world right here in Dushanbe. I'm Jyoti, a journalist in New Delhi, in India, and it's wonderful to be here. But apart from thanking Dr. Mohsin, I'd like to say how wonderful it is to see old friends from Iraq who met in 2019, I think that was the last time, in Afghanistan. It's wonderful to see Dr. Spanta and Mr. Ismail Khan, the tiger of Iraq, who is right here next to us in Dushanbe. And to thank the government of Tajikistan for having us all. I know that Dr. Mohsin would, that any country in the neighborhood would give its eye teeth to have Dr. Mohsin and the AISS conference to be held in their countries. I know India would be very happy, but Dushanbe has the privilege. And so I think we are all grateful to Dushanbe and to the President of Pakistan, Mr. Rahmatullah, for having us all here. It was so moving this morning to hear Farishta sing about Watan, and to, I think, all of us who flew to Dushanbe over the last 24 hours or the last couple of weeks or so, to fly over those incredible mountains, the Tien Shan, the Panis. We read about these things in our history or geography lessons as we grow up, but to see them with our own eyes was so utterly moving. And I don't think there's one person in this room this morning who was not moved by what Farishta sang and what Ms. Bahar spoke this morning in her Persian poetry. And to think that we're just a heartbeat away from Kabul and from Iraq. But many of you, Afghans in this room, can't go back home. And that is heartbreaking. But the question is, it's been 2 years, 2 long years, as I said, 2 years and 3 months, and perhaps there's not one person who doesn't think of their homeland every day and every night. Now, Dr. Spanta spoke about the Nelson Mandela model. So where do you go from there? What is this security black hole? And that's the topic of our session this morning. What is the security black hole that Afghanistan is? How do you break it up? How do you identify what the elements of this black hole are? And how do you transform the color black into the different colors of Afghanistan? Dr. Spanta's reference to the Nelson Mandela model, when Nelson Mandela was inside jail on Robben Island inside White South Africa for 26 long years, and then eventually he became free. Is that the model for Afghanistan? Or perhaps there's another model. Perhaps, the most famous refugee in the world, there are millions of refugees in the world, but what's the one name that comes to your mind? It's Dr. Dalai Lama, who has lived in India for more than 45 years. It's 50 years since he's lived in India. And he created a government in exile. So is that one model for the Afghan community to come together, to come to one physical place perhaps, and of course there are Afghans all around the world. But perhaps it might be a good idea to have one physical space where you form where the best and the brightest of the minds of the Afghan community all over the world could come together and perhaps take this conversation forward. But I would like to start this morning by asking Mr. Mohsin Dawar, who is a member of Parliament in Pakistan. The Pakistan Parliament doesn't exist right now, waiting for elections that will be held in a couple of months from now. Mr. Dawar is a very, very well-known MP, a member of Parliament, politician, very young one. His 39th birthday only a couple of days ago, so please wish him happy birthday, everybody. Mr. Dawar, who is from Waziristan, which is neighboring province of Afghanistan. So I'd like to ask you to start with your first comments on what you think is the problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jyoti. And first of all, I would like to thank the Awaaz Institute of Strategic Studies for this great initiative of giving us all the opportunity to think about what's happening in Afghanistan and what's the future way forward. I was supposed to be attending this conference last year also, but unfortunately I was not allowed in Islamabad, and I was stopped in Islamabad airport. When we talk about Afghanistan and we talk about the elements responsible for the current situation in Afghanistan, I think one of the question points Nabil very beautifully summarized. I think a verse of his poetry beautifully summarizes this current situation, where he says that das ist so nicht, dass die Padevrani gelassen werden. Das ist so nicht, dass die Padevrani gelassen werden. Das ist so nicht, dass die Kabul of the You know, the crux and the conclusion in this one verse is that there is hardly anyone who is not responsible for this current mess in Afghanistan. Back in 2016 or 17 or 15, I'm forgetting the exact year, we went to Afghanistan for the Bazaar of Bashar in Jafaryan. At that time, we met the governor of Jafaryan. And we were talking about the situation in Afghanistan. And something which he said at that time, it still keeps coming out again and again in my mind. When he said that the situation is very complicated right now. And because when we sit with one country, they make another responsible for this. When we sit with Iran, they talk about Saudi Arabia. When we sit with America, they talk about Russia and China. When we sit with Pakistan, they make India responsible for it. When we sit with India, they make Pakistan responsible for it. But the reality is that there is almost everybody who is responsible for the current mess in Afghanistan. And personally, I believe that all the human rights issues and all the slogans of the human rights by the Western world or everybody in the world are just, it has become a joke after what happened in Afghanistan in the previous 2 years. It started with the Dawar, and I call it, the start of a new great game. And the Dawar was something which de-recognized the state of Afghanistan, the Republic of Afghanistan. And it started the process of the death and destruction left in Afghanistan, because it will go on. In the recent days, we have seen and we have everybody has heard about the attacks and the rise and the presence of militants in various districts of Tulpa and other parts of Pakistan. And it's the situation in almost all the different countries with Afghanistan. So because the plan was to destabilize the entire region. But unfortunately, Afghanistan was the epicenter of all these things. When we talk about the regional powers with Afghanistan, everybody thought, China and Russia, everybody thought that the US they should leave at any cost. Somehow they thought that we will caught Taliban. Pakistan had their own agendas. They thought that a government, their proxies, if they install in Afghanistan, they will work for them. But everybody is proving wrong. I've been told that we have only about 2 minutes left. But I mean, conclude it in the way that everybody will be proved wrong. Taliban are threat not just for Afghanistan, they are threat for the entire region. We have witnessed the rise in the attacks in almost every neighboring country of Afghanistan since Taliban has taken over Afghanistan, and it will keep going on because they are harboring terrorists from almost all over the world. There is the presence of ETIM, there is the presence of Islamic movement in Uzbekistan, and recently, they have allowed the creation of Taliban in Pakistan. And we have also, seen a very significant presence of ISKP in Afghanistan. So the plan is to destabilize the entire region. If you talk about Taliban, their collapse is inevitable. But the problem which we face right now is a proper alternative. They cannot survive. They cannot survive because of some reason. They are the modern state system is they are alien to a modern state system. They are still not putting the ideology of militancy. They are still trying to run this country with the same militant mindset. All the other thing, the drug trafficking and everything is still going on in Afghanistan. They've been begging from the rest of the world to be recognized, but they have never sought, even for a moment, a recognition from their fellow Afghans. So their collapse is inevitable. They cannot even coexist with their own system, with their own members, with their own hierarchy. But the problem here is, which we face right now, is we need a proper alternative. We need a proper alternative. This is one of the great initiatives, I think it should have been started. I know that it's been, but it needs to be brought on even more. And we need a proper alternative which can think about and design a strategy of how to get rid of Afghanistan, get rid of Taliban from Afghanistan, and how to hand over Afghanistan again to the people of Afghanistan. One thing I would like to say at the end is that right now, the most important thing I think which every Afghan should be concerned of is the unity of Afghanistan. Because the enemies of Afghanistan, they will be planning from each and every angle to destabilize further Afghanistan and to destroy and break Afghanistan. So the only thing I think which we can do as being Afghan is to work for at least the unity of Afghanistan. And if we keep Afghanistan united, that will be the defeat of the enemies of Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mohsin, for keeping to the initial 5-minute time limit. I'd like to. Okay, the mic is right next to you. So I'd like to request all my participants to speak for 5 minutes. Esther, 5 minutes. Yeah. So this is just the initial 5 minutes, and then you have a chance to come back. So I'd like to introduce to you. At the end? Okay. Sure. So I'd like to introduce to you all Dr. Esther Zubiri, who is with the United Nations Security Council expert on the Islamic State, on the Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. She's with the Taliban Analytical support and Sanctions monitoring team, but her expertise is with these terrorist groups, especially the Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda. Dr. Zubiri.
Thank you very much. Dr. Moradia, Director of the Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies, Climate Host, delegates, experts, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first to say what an honor and pleasure it is for me to be back in Dushanbe to participate in this splendid event. I believe we were all shocked by the events of the 2021 when the Taliban took over and immediately demonstrated that they have to learn nothing from the isolation and ultimate failure that characterized their previous time in power. The monitoring team, which I belong to, I'm an independent expert, and all my views are expressed in that independent. It doesn't represent member states or the United Nations Secretariat. But the monitoring team, which I'm an expert of, has repeatedly noted that the Taliban of 2023 is, with few exceptions, the same Taliban of the 90s. I have to say that it's very risky to call Taliban 0.20. How they can call pragmatic Taliban when they refer to Sirajuddin Haqqani, for example? Is he really a pragmatic Taliban? I don't think so. The past 2.25 years have passed with the international community struggling to agree on a new approach to address the current circumstances in Afghanistan. The monitoring team, in his last report, quoted, say, promises made by the Taliban in August 2021 to be more inclusive, break with terrorist groups, respect universal human rights, grant a general amnesty, and not possess a security threat to other countries seems increasingly hollow, if not plain false, in 2023. The absence of an internationally agreed multilateral strategy on how to deal with the Taliban and to what common end has allowed the regime to accelerate its consolidation of power and reneging of its promises. The draft is that member states agree on that diagnosis. The monitoring team writes authoritative threat assessment reports that meet with the approval of member states. We all know that the Taliban remains close to Al-Qaeda and a range of other terrorist groups of concern to most of you. The monitoring team, already again quoting it, said that the relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda remains close and symbiotic, with Al-Qaeda viewing Taliban administer Afghanistan as a safe haven. Taliban provide Al-Qaeda fighters with monthly welfare payments, Afghan passports and tazkiras, and under the patronage of high-ranking officials of the de facto Taliban authorities, Al-Qaeda members infiltrate law enforcement agencies and public administration bodies, ensuring that the security of Al-Qaeda cells and the suicide bombers training camps disperse throughout the world. One training director of the de facto Ministry of Defense is an Al-Qaeda member, while training was based on Al-Qaeda manuals. Two provincial governors of the Taliban de facto administration are affiliated with Al-Qaeda, the former governor of Pakistan and former governor of Kabul, and the governor of Nuristan. Another Talib associated with Al-Qaeda is the deputy director of the General Directorate of Intelligence. Taliban harboring and supporting TTP, as mentioned for our previous speaker, evidence a threat projecting beyond the borders of Afghanistan and against the group's numerous assertions that Afghanistan soil will not be used for carrying out attacks against other countries. The relationship between the Afghan Taliban and TTP, like the Taliban's relation with Al-Qaeda, is highly bonded and unlikely to dissipate. Even the splinter of the TTP, the recently created Taliban Jihad Pakistan, in their modus operandi of the recent attacks, has the fingerprints of the Haqqani. The Taliban tells absurd lies about there not being foreign fighters in Afghanistan, but Pakistan clearly sees the activities of TTP, and Tajikistan clearly sees Ansarullah. Not only that, the Badr unit, jointly with Ansarullah, perpetrates attacks against the National Resistance Front, as happened in the Balashkar attack. The monitoring team noted that the Taliban have quietly reached out to member states requesting intelligence and logistical support to fight ISIL's Khorasan, offering itself as a counter-terrorism partner. Given the close relationship of the Taliban that enjoy with Al-Qaeda, TTP, and other terrorist groups, there is a significant risk in allowing the Taliban to define against which terrorist groups it will act and against which it will not. Restrictions announced but not implemented by the Taliban on the Afghan drug production has caused the wholesale price of methamphetamine to double, with the total production of this synthetic drug in Afghanistan now surpassing heroin. The Haqqani network has been increasingly involved in the production and trafficking of methamphetamine and synthetic drugs, working closely with criminal networks and syndicates in Southeast Asia and Central Asia to smuggle fentanyl into Europe and the United States. The Taliban will play one interlocutor off against another if they are allowed to. They will use blackmail against anyone that they consider susceptible through weakness or isolation. It will be vital to think collegiately, multilaterally, not just CO2 bilaterally. Water courses, trade roads, pipelines, all of it at common cause. So do counter-terrorism and counter-narcotics. Finally, you need international solidarity and support. The United Nations has a big role to play in this. Indeed, it will argue that you need the 1988, the Taliban, and the 1267 Al-Qaeda sanctions regime. The Taliban hates you and wants the sanctions to be abolished. It massively in your interest that it continues. It strengthens your hand in every bilateral dealing with the Taliban. You will see in the graphic that 58 United Nations sanctions individuals are holding cabinet and senior level positions among de facto authorities. The desired outcome of Afghanistan must be stabilization, inclusivity, integration, and prosperity. We can make it in our image, and nobody seriously expects that the Taliban to fall from power in the unforeseeable future. But we can make it clear when the Taliban pursue foolish, self-defeating policies like dabbling in terrorism, like turning a blind eye to drug dealers, like alienating large ethnic and religious communities of Afghans, like undermining the capabilities of the female half of the Afghan population. I believe that you are here the best equipped to force the Taliban to receive this message. Thank you very much. And if I still have a little of time, okay, we will do it later, no problem. Can you see?
Thank you so much, Dr. Zubiri, for keeping to the time limit. I appreciate it. May I call upon Mohammad Jafaryan to finish your presentation. 5 minutes, please.
خوشحالم که البته فکر کنم ترجمه صحبت‌ها رو برای عزیزانی که دارن ترجمه می‌کنن چون از تاجیکستان هستن که سخت باشه سعی کنم آرام صحبت کنم. خوشحالم که در جمع عزیزان هستم و قیادت دکتر مرادیان میتونم بفهمم برگزاری چنین چقدر سختی کنمشون. خوشحالم در جمعی هستم که از نسل‌های مختلف مجاهدین و سیاستمداران افغانستان اینجا حضور دارند. از جمله جناب آقای اسماعیلی و جناب آقای محسن مدیر سیاستمدار جوان موفق مقاومت و از عزیز آقای علیزاده فرزند شهید هستم. حرف زدن در این جمع کار سختی و سعی دارم که گذرا باید بگیریم. قبل از اینکه شروع کنم با بحث‌های نظری رو خیلی از عزیزان گفتن و خواهند گفت اغلب ما را توی رسانه‌ها بسیار دیدید حرفا تکراری هست. دلم می‌خواد یک خاطره‌ای بگم شاید جذاب باشه در مورد امیر اسماعیل خان و من کارم مستندسازی توی چند نماد ایشان رو دیدم. من سال 1372 شمسی نمی‌دونم اشتباه میشه 1372 شمسی از غرب افغانستان وارد هرات شدم. تقریبا تمام غرب افغانستان در اختیار استان بود و به چیزی حدود 25 روز منتظر شدم تا بتونم فرصت گفتگو بگیرم چون بسیار باشکوه بود و تونسته بودم با موفقیت در اختیار بگیرم. یک امیدی در مردم زنده شده بود. هرات بسیار شهر پرشوری بود. کات من چند سال بعد در زندان جلسینه در قندهار رفتم اینجا و دیدن مداومت بقیه طالبان من پیشنهاد بودم که برم دکتر اسماعیل رو در زندان ببینم و گفتگو کنم و من و همکارم آقای مدیر بلندتر بودیم این کار بکنیم. دیدن یک شیر در قفس کار سختی بود و ما نپذیرفتیم. 1376 در فاریاب ایشان به حال جنگ بودن و برای دوستان اومدم سنگرهای مختلفی روشن توضیح میدادن. ایشان بعد از اینکه از اسارت طالبان گریخته بودن در فاریاب جبهه جدیدی رو باز کرده بودن. کات حکومت به قدرت رسیده، ایشان وزیر آب و برق هستن، خدمتشون رسیدن باشون وجود کردن و این بار آخر که نفر خدمتشون رسیدن. این اوضاع آسان به دست نیامده. ببینید همین خلق، این چیزی که نیست، ریش‌هایی رو سفید کرده، موهایی رو سفید کرده، کسانی رو خونهایی به جنبه رسیدن. خب 3 دقیقه گذشت من فکر می‌کنم یک اشاره‌ای فرازی رو توضیح بدم تا بعد اگر فرصت بود وارد بحث بشیم. تیتری که اینجا هست سیاه‌چاله‌های امنیتی، من فکر می‌کنم مهمترین نکته‌ای که میشه اشاره کرد که در هر جای جهان تمام مسلمان افغانستان سیاه‌چاله‌های امنیتی می‌تونه بیاد در حوزه مدیریت هست. هم از این ناتوانی در مدیریت منابع باشه یا اینکه دسیسه و انحراف هدفمند مدیریت منابع کنه. فکر می‌کنم طالبان دچار هر دوی مشکلات هست. در حوزه مدیریت منابع انسانی، منابع مالی، منابع تعلیمی ادارت به افغانستان مشکلاتی داره که حالا اگر بخش من وارد بشم در حوزه منابع انسانی اخراج مهاجرین از افغانستان، وضعیت بازگشت مهاجرین از ایران، وضعیت ستمی که بعضی از اقوام خاص میشه به فرهنگ اونها میشه، اینها را اگر فرصت شد باز میکنن در حوزه منابع مالی. اینکه چطور وقتی که طالبان آمدن افغانی قریب 100 افغانی $1 بود و امروز 100 افغانی 67 افغانی $1 تورم منفی، در حالی که اقتصاد بسیار ضعیفتر شده، کلی پول خارج شده و پول اونها نمیتونن چاپ بکنن، هنوز هم چاپ نکردن، دولت هم نیستن، با دولت تعامل ندارن. چطور میتونی تورم منفی باشه؟ این در اقتصاد طرف به معنی این هست که تقاضا برای افغانی بسیار بیشتر از اینه و این ویدان کردن ها یا $1 تقسیم ساده بکنیم میتونیم بفهمیم به این فاصله میلیاردها دلار پول برای افغانستان شده که صرف خرید افغانی شده که حالا اگر شد بخش منابع مادی رو توضیح میدم و بحث منابع مدیریت منابع طبیعی که به مدیریت آب، مسئله پیوند و مسئله کانال مشتق برمیگرده. انشاءالله اگر فرصت شد و صحبت در اختیارتون است. امیدوارم وقت رعایت کرده باشه.
Thank you so much for keeping to the time limit. I'd like to now ask Dr. David Sedney, who has known Afghanistan for several decades, and we would like to benefit from your experience. 5 minutes, please.
First, I want to thank you. I want to thank Dr. Meridian and Dr. Sponda for making this forum possible. I think it's an exceptionally important potential for the kinds of ideas that Dr. Sponda and others have put forward, put them into action. Our topic today, I thought, was particularly apt. The title was Security Afghanistan, Security Whole. And, of course, 3.5 years later, in 2019, the U.S. and the Afghan government did what the Taliban wanted and gave back enough time in return received the 2 professors. For 13 years, the U.S. held Haji Bashir Mirza, an Afghan drug trafficker, and the Taliban kept saying, we want him back, and in the end they kidnapped American Mark Felix and said, give him back, or release Haji Bashir Mirza, or else we'll keep Mark Felix there. 2.5 years later, we did exactly what the Taliban wanted, and the Taliban realized once again that the rest of the world will do what they want as long as they act in a consistent way, as long as they never compromise, as long as they don't do anything to address the rest of the world's concerns, then it works. what the Taliban are learning now, and this is the tragedy of the black hole that Afghanistan has become, the Taliban are doing now the same thing. They're saying we're going to continue to abuse people, we're going to continue to respect the things we're doing, we're going to continue to work with terrorists that will be a threat to you, and you are not going to do anything about it. And so far, it seems to me tragically that's what's happening.
Thank you so much, David, for taking your time. And I just want to reassure all my participants that you will have another round before we open it up to the House, where you can talk a little bit more, expand a little bit more your thoughts on this issue. I'd now like to call upon Dr. Mohsin.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and also I'd like to thank, first of all, we never call colleagues of Afghanistan because still we're very close to COVID. You know, when we arrived, then immediately we started comparing the weather of Dushanbe and Kabul. What do you think? Kabul had the same weather. For millions of Afghans like me, for example, I was 1 year old for the past I did not grow up in all the difficulties of Afghanistan. I was working with units here during the first era of Taliban. And some people are asking me why you have such a rigid stand against Taliban. Taliban might change, but since I've seen 5 years of Taliban, directly what the attachment in because of units here working, they will never change. That's and also we heard from our participants. Let me put it this way: during the Doha, most of Afghans, the concern was that the proxy peace will push the proxy elements to take over in Afghanistan. At that time, some of the countries and even the region, they were trying to whitewash Taliban. They have changed. They will accept what the region say, what the international community say, and they will be different of face of Taliban. And still, some people are pushing that okay, the old version of Taliban or very new version of Taliban will change, and this is I can say since 2018 till now, the same people are pushing for that Taliban is change. While I'm sure it will be the women's rights, the girls' rights, the education rights, the ethnic minorities, all this will be discussed in different panels. But let me put it this way, that some of the countries were thinking that by installing Taliban, they will reach to their strategic depth in Afghanistan. And my brother Dawar also indicated that activity. But now, this over 2 years proved that this is terrorist groups who reach to their strategic depth in Afghanistan. They got access to the most sophisticated weapons and ammunition of NATO forces. And now we see that sometimes Mexico, sometimes India, sometimes other countries are raising up. Okay, these are coming from the left and behind. They got access to the more sophisticated, intelligence equipment or surveillances. And right now they are using these against Afghan people, against women, against human rights. They got access to a territory. The madrasa has increased according to the reports. Recently, there was a delegation from some of the religious parties from Pakistan, and there was discussion about how to shift 15,000 of these madrasas who were behind the brainwashing of Taliban in these 30 years per year. They got access to, the financial system of the music, very. They more than all important than all. They push the motivation of all groups around the world. Look, when Taliban can defeat NATO forces, 50 something countries more or less, why we cannot defeat our own government? And that motivation has increased. If you go to Baramsha, you will see people from different parts of the world. When you go to different parts of Afghanistan and different capital, knowing this situation, of course, it's a challenge for the people. But still, again, those who were interested to push Taliban forward. Here I can say that some countries are pushing that, okay, who is the replacement of Taliban? Taliban have their own internal agenda, Daesh have a regional agenda. If Taliban is getting weak, then Daesh will take over. I think this is a big lie. This is just to push. Right now, who provide shelter for groups more than Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and all these 20 groups, 21 groups, like Katiba, Bukhari, Ansar, Jundul Khalifa, Jundullah, it's all these groups, they are working at the ISK or promoting ISK is the best way is that, okay, we are better than ISK, which I think this is something the region should be aware, and we should be aware that this is fake. I can tell you that this is fake ISK. It's not started from now. When I was chief of ADS, even at that time when the ISK was started, both these similar groups were created with black and white flag, and they were attacking the border of Afghanistan. And then with the white flag were appearing, okay, we were the one who and this is the case in Konab, this is the case in Zobel, everywhere. Because of that, just to conclude that, I will not go in detail. Dr. Zubiri, thanks for his presentation and also thanks to the entire system. If we go through this report, you will find out what's going on in Afghanistan. My final remark is that because most of the time, since all the countries are busy with their own daily problem, even I have some reports indicating that a group of Taliban are thinking to have access to the tactical nuclear whether they can get it from Pakistan or whether they can pay for some engineer, and that will be, of course, a disaster, which is already. We had seen the sign of disaster for the region. I will end it with a quote of one of the Taliban leaders. They say to their followers, he said, "My grandfather defeated British. My father, Jalaluddin Haqqani, defeated Russian. I defeated American, and this is the time for my kids to rule the region." This is a quote from Sarai Haqqani to follow close commanders. Different links. There was representation from Haqqani, which was close to Pakistan. There was representation from Al-Qaeda, which was, circulating this rumor that he's very close to the United States. There was representation from another group, which was also close to Iran. The same and also China. And during that time, they have established their relation with some other countries as well. Right now, and India was, although in surface it was known that India doesn't have any relation, but they tried with their best. They started from Qatar to extend the relation, but they could not succeed that much. But now they have a very deep relation. There is no doubt. And as I mentioned, that some of the countries are still thinking that if we remain outside, then what is happening in the future, they will be not aware. And because of that, it's more for intelligence gathering, if we put it this way. This is not a strategic relation because it's difficult to. Most of these countries that they are sending their representation, they want to know what's going on in Afghanistan. It's not for relief, it's not for women's rights, this is not for girls' rights. If that was the case, why they gave Afghanistan handed over to? Why they give votes to Dohati? This is Afghans are not buying anymore these with wording. They are there for their own purpose. They are there just to be aware of what's going on. That's the main reason.
I'm Shanti D'Souza. I'm a founder of an independent research forum called Mantraya in Goa, in India. Well, I think the panel is looking at security black hole, and all of you are talking about the black hole. And one gets a sense that when you're talking about Taliban, there seems to be no consensus, either between the countries or at the UN, of how to deal with it. My question, to keep it brief, is to look at the situation as it's evolving and to know from each panelist what really is your country perspective of dealing with the Taliban. Do you see it as a security threat? And if you do, how do you deal with it? And the panel, given the fact that you're looking at a collection of threats and tragedies, Afghanistan is a real tragedy I think all of us have to deal with and more importantly address with. So my question to the UN independent expert is, how would you see UN working towards the situation of addressing the threat in Afghanistan from the Taliban and its association with Al-Qaeda and the linkages it has with a host number of international terrorist groups and also the fact that they are involved in drug trafficking. So these are a lot of questions, but I'd just like to have your perspective how to deal with it. Thank you.
Afghanistan is a net security consumer, and the way you deal with a net security consumer is you pay it off. The way the British paid off the Afghan rulers in the 1800s and 1900s. They paid the money, not become a security threat. The same way you could argue that Western aid agencies are now paying off the Taliban through humanitarian assistance in order to reduce the chances they will become a strategic threat. Very clearly, China's approach to Afghanistan is to pay off the Taliban with economic aid to prevent to get the Taliban not to support Muslims in China against the Chinese government. So it's a great question, where did the black hole come from? Does it go back 2,000 years, or less? But I want to make sure you're very clear. I did not say it was the Taliban who are the black hole, who caused the black hole, but today they are the black hole. And my final point is that those who suffer the most from this destructive, chaotic black hole are the people of Afghanistan, especially the women of Afghanistan. They're the ones that are suffering the most. Is there a way forward? I'll leave that to my Afghan friends and colleagues.
I think the best definition, instead of black hole, we better call it the hot oven of the geopolitical games. Yeah? But as far as the presentation of Dr. Zubiri goes, I would like to thank the team for providing some detailed information in the past few months. However, listening to you shows the utter failure of the sanctions regime, of the counterterrorism resolution of the Security Council, in particular 1373, 1624, and what you just mentioned, 1267. The key question is that why the implementation of these resolutions and the sanctions regime has remained poor, and why it's been politicized from time to I remember that we presented a few cases to the Sanctions Committee, and it was put on hold by a key member of the Security Council twice. So if only the counterterrorism resolutions of the UN Security Council and the sanctions regime against the Taliban were implemented 50%, the Taliban wouldn't have been where they are. The key intention behind the counterterrorism resolutions was to stop what has happened in Afghanistan. So I know that it's not your job, but how do you feel? Do the members of the council feel responsible that it's time to review the sanctions regime? Because the sanctions regime in the past 2.5 years has remained the same, and it's still, if you go through it, it recognizes the Taliban as an insurgent of the republic. Isn't it time to review the sanctions regime? Isn't it time to emphasize on the implementation and monitoring and depoliticization of the counterterrorism resolutions?
Question is very, very timely question. Very timely question, and I have to say that my opinion is in my personal capacity because, again, I'm an independent expert of the Security Council, so I'm just giving you my view on how the negotiations of the Council are, but please don't understand that. You are totally right. The regime was decided when the Taliban were an insurgency, and now they are de facto authorities. But the problem is that among specifically the P5s of the Security Council, United States, China, Russia, UK and France, there is no consensus among the P3s and the P2s in how the regime needs to be reviewed. And that makes it very difficult to reach because, as you mentioned, sometimes the listing of an individual is highly politicized. I remember when Afghanistan listed Sirajuddin Haqqani, was the only designating state of Sirajuddin Haqqani. A question, why Anas Haqqani has never been listed, for example. Sorry. Absolutely. The problem is that now we're in the process of the review of the resolution again, and I have to say that I'm not optimistic that the language of the resolution will be reviewed, because the fear of member states is that since there is no consensus, it could lead that the regime will not be extended, and that will lead up to a much more difficult scenario in which the regime will be like the Iran regime, lifted, and you get all those individuals that at the end of the day, at least they are listed right now, won't be listed. So basically what we are envisioning is that the resolution, the text of the resolution is going to remain the same, but of course the guidelines of the resolution, we are working on the guidelines because, for example, what happened with the asset freeze is what happened with the arms embargo. He mentioned the all NATO weaponry that the Taliban are selling. What happened with the travel ban? You know, it's not effective, to be honest, because let's be honest, even when those measures were in place, the Taliban were vulnerating them with no consequences. And now that they are de facto authorities, they still are vulnerating them, because we can see Mullah Baradar the other day going to Russia or going to Iran, and nothing happens, and it's a listed individual. So, of course, I'm with you, and on a personal view, I think that the regime needs to be more, the regime talk about the High Peace Council. But if we go further, I need you to understand something. Originally, the Taliban sanctions regime was jointly with the 1267, was the Al-Qaeda sanctions regime. And the Taliban were considered terrorist organization. It was when the negotiations happened and the regimes were split, it just became the 1988 regime for the peace and stability of Afghanistan, which, from my point of view, and this is a very personal point of view, give us in that conundrum, you know, that...
Why isn't the UN speak up more?
This is a question for the UN. I'm not the UN. I'm an independent expert. I'm an independent expert. The problem is the political sensibilities. You have, for example, in the last briefing of the HSD for UNAMA in the Security Council, I was there, and if you see the speech of the permanent representative of China was advocating for the review of the sanctions and the lifting of the sanctions, while you have the United States that wants to keep the sanctions as they are. It's really, right now, it's very fragmented and divided. the political view of each of the P5s, which at the end of the day are the ones that make the decision, are asking for a seat in the United Nations when they are even banning female to work for the United Nations. It's really a paradox, you know. So they really need to understand that without those conditions and implementing the international human rights conventions, there is no way of legitimization. And I have to say something here, because people hear different voices that if the UN is willing to legitimize or there is no, one thing is engagement on a base by basis, and the other is legitimization. Legitimization is a very big word.
Right.
It's a very big word.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you will agree with me that.
در 30 ثانیه سعی کنم براتون بگم. اولی رو بگم هر کشوری که به طالبان امید بسته و این اونها سرمایه‌گذاری کرده، من فکر می‌کنم چه چین باشه، چه هند باشه، چه ایران باشه، چه امریکا باشه، روزی از این داستانش پشیمان خواهد شد و اونها خواهد گشت و به موسیقی خواهد زد، چنانکه تمام پاکستان اتفاق افتاد. و با این موضوع تموم می‌کنم که لطیف قربت شاعر بزرگ کرد میگه سیاست هزار راه دارد 999 پایش به جنگ ختم می شود. انشاءالله در اینجا میتونیم این یک راه رو برای افغانستان به صلح از
Absolutely, the last 30 seconds.
One last comment which I would like to make is that right now, you know, what's something which is needed more is that Afghans need to sit together to provide a strategy, because as Nabil said, that a consensus is very much important, and there needs to be a debate started, you know, anywhere in the world. It can be in the shape of, you know, a lawyer in exile somewhere, but a consensus on strategy to take or back Afghanistan is very much needed. At least from somewhere, a debate should be started. Thank you.
Right. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists, and I know you agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that this has been a very stimulating discussion. Lots of ideas have been thrown out. Lots of questions still remain unanswered, but we will have the next couple of days to discuss it. Thank you all very much. Big hand to my panelists.